Something was different about Elena tonight. Kenzo Sato had negotiated 17 hostile takeovers by reading the tells others missed. A micro-expression, a hesitation, the quarter-second delay before a lie landed. He'd built his empire on noticing what didn't belong. And tonight, something about his waitress didn't belong. She moved through the Onyx Lounge with her usual grace, but there was a hitch in it. A fractional pause before she reached for glasses. The way she angled her face away from direct light. The way her hand stayed closer to her body, protective, like she was cradling something broken. Kenzo found himself watching her instead of listening to the federal judge beside him drone about waterfront development permits. Found himself tracking Elena's path through the room, waiting for her to approach his booth, needing to see whatever she was hiding. When she finally did, carrying the shade margox he hadn't ordered but always accepted, he noticed three more things. The foundation on her cheek was the wrong shade, too light, applied in layers like she was covering something. Her hands trembled when she reached for his glass. And when light caught her wrist as she poured, he saw the shadow of fingerprints blooming dark against her brown skin. Kenzo's world had narrowed to those fingerprints, to the mathematics of pressure and time and cruelty they represented, to the single question burning through his legendary composure. Who dared to touch what was mine? The thought arrived unbidden, possessive, completely irrational. She wasn't his. She was a waitress in a club he owned, an employee, a stranger who happened to arrange his flowers and hum songs that reminded him of home. But watching her fight to keep her hand steady, seeing the fear she was trying so desperately to hide, Kenzo felt something ancient and territorial unfurl in his chest. Elena, her name left his mouth before strategy could stop it. She raised her eyes, and he saw his answer written in their depths. Someone had hurt her. Someone would pay. The only question was how much. Elena Vance had 3 rules for surviving the Onyx Lounge. Rule 1: never be early, never be late, exist in the exact slice of time expected, then disappear. Rule 2: master the arithmetic of invisibility, memorize drink preferences, predict needs before they're spoken, become the perfect ghost, present enough to serve, absent enough to forget. Rule 3: stay out of Silas Thorne's office. She'd broken Rule 3 twice. Both times lived under her clothes now, mapped in bruises that bloomed and faded and bloomed again like a violent garden she couldn't uproot. Kelly's face appeared in her mind, gap-toothed smile, homework spread across their kitchen table, believing her mother worked at a fancy restaurant downtown. Not a lie, just incomplete. The Onyx was fancy, and it was downtown, and the men who dined there controlled everything from city contracts to which neighborhoods got policed and which got forgotten. Elena's job was to float through that world without touching it, without being touched by it. She failed at the second part. Thursday night, 8:47 p.m. The lounge thrummed with its usual frequency. Low conversations weighted with consequence, laughter that had nothing to do with humor, the clink of crystal against mahogany. Elena moved between tables like a ghost, collecting empty plates, refilling wine glasses, performing the choreography she'd perfected over 8 months. Table 7, Kenzo Sato's booth, was occupied but quiet tonight, just 2 men instead of the usual crowd. Kenzo sat with his back to the window, the city sprawling behind him like a conquered thing. His companion was younger, sharper, gesturing aggressively while Kenzo listened with the stillness of an apex predator conserving energy. Elena had studied that stillness, had learned to read its fluctuations the way sailors read the ocean. Tonight it felt different, taut, expectant, like a wire pulled to its breaking point. She approached with the wine Kenzo hadn't ordered but always accepted. Shade Margox, 2009, decanted for exactly 45 minutes. Mr. Sato, she kept her voice neutral, her eyes on the bottle. The young man continued talking, something about territorial disputes in the garment district. She poured with practiced steadiness, but her hands had their own memory. Today's memory involved Silas Thorne's office, a locked door, accusations about stolen tips she'd never taken, and his hand around her throat while he explained, so reasonably, so calmly, that complaining would mean disappearing. Not from the job, from the city. "Kelly is 7, isn't she?" he'd said, still smiling. "Third grade at Franklin Elementary. Gets picked up by her grandmother every day at 3:15. The threat was elegant, specific, unspoken but crystal clear. So Elena had nodded, had apologized for the tips she'd never stolen, had let him press her face against his desk while he explained exactly how grateful she should be for his mercy. The bruise on her cheek was gratitude. The one circling her throat was a promise of what came next if she broke Rule 3 again. Now pouring wine in Kenzo Sato's booth, her hands began to shake. Not visibly, just a tremor, a vibration at the frequency of terror, but enough that when the bottle touched crystal it sang, a high, clear note of warning. She steadied herself, finished pouring, started to step back. Elena. Her name in his mouth was new, alarming. She'd been Miss for 8 months, the formal distance suiting them both. Names implied recognition. Recognition implied visibility. Visibility got you hurt. Kenzo's voice stopped her, not loud, not harsh, just present in a way it hadn't been before. She kept her eyes on the wine bottle. "Yes, Mr. Sato." "You're shaking." It wasn't a question. Elena's mind raced through acceptable responses. Tired, cold, low blood sugar, anything but the truth. "I apologize, it won't happen again." His gaze moved, tracked across her cheek where the foundation was cracking under the lounge's heat, down to her wrist where her sleeve had shifted, revealing the shadow of fingerprints. Elena watched him see it, watched recognition dawn, watched his stillness transform into something sharper. "Who did that to you?" His voice was conversational, pleasant, even, the same tone he used when discussing business contracts. It terrified her more than shouting would have. "I wasn't paying attention in the kitchen, walked into a door." The lie tasted mechanical, rehearsed. "A door?" "Yes, sir." Kenzo Sato had learned to lie at 7 years old, sitting across from his father during treaty negotiations with the Yamada-gumi. Never show what you want, the old man had taught him. The moment they see desire, they own you. 25 years later, Kenzo had perfected the art of wanting nothing. Except he'd been lying to himself about Elena Vance for 3 months. It started small, noticing she always brought white lilies for his booth instead of the standard roses, that she arranged them in asymmetrical clusters of 3, the way his mother used to in their garden in Osaka. A detail so specific it couldn't be coincidence. Then he noticed the humming. Old Motown songs while she cleared plates, her voice barely audible beneath the lounge's ambient music. Songs his mother played while cooking, melodies he hadn't heard in 20 years. He told himself it was simple observation, pattern recognition, the same skill that helped him read competitors and anticipate market shifts. But observation didn't explain why he'd started arriving 30 minutes early on Thursdays just to watch her work, why he'd memorized her schedule, Tuesday through Friday, 7 p.m. to midnight, why he'd stopped scheduling Friday meetings so he wouldn't miss her shift, why he'd noticed 3 weeks ago that she'd stopped humming. Now, watching her lie about walking into a door, Kenzo understood what had changed. Someone had broken something in her, something that made her believe doors left fingerprints. "Leave us?" He didn't look away from Elena as his booth emptied. His associate Daisuke hesitated. They were mid-negotiation, money on the table, but Kenzo's tone left no room for debate. The section cleared in seconds. Elena stood frozen, still holding the wine bottle, her breathing shallow and controlled. Fear, yes, but managed. She'd had practice. "Sit," Kenzo gestured to the booth. Mr. Sato, I can't. I have other tables. They're covered, Sid. She sat, wrong in every way, a server in a guest's booth, her uniform cheap against leather that cost more than she probably made in a month. But refusing would draw more attention than complying. Kenzo didn't sit across from her. Instead, he leaned against the table, keeping distance between them. Predators knew when to advance and when to wait. I'm going to ask you a question, he said quietly, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Her throat moved. Yes, sir. Does Silas Thorne know you're afraid of him? The color drained from her face. That was answer enough. Kenzo had suspected Thorne for weeks, noticed how Elena's routes through the lounge changed when he was on shift, how her shoulders tensed when he entered a room. But suspicion and confirmation were different animals. How long? Kenzo kept his voice level professional, the same tone he used in boardrooms, not interrogations. Mr. Sato, how long has my floor manager been hurting you? Elena's hands twisted in her lap. I need this job. Kelly needs. I can't lose this job. Kelly is your daughter. He'd learned her name from employee files he had no business reviewing. 7 years old. Franklin Elementary. Grandmother pickup at 3:15. The same details Thorne would have access to. She's 7, Elena whispered. She needs school supplies and winter clothes, and her voice cracked. She needs me to keep working. And Thorne knows this. He's my supervisor. He knows everything. He's my employee. Kenzo let that truth settle, which means he answers to me. Elena's eyes snapped up, meeting his for the first time with something sharper than fear. Hope, maybe, or desperation. With respect, Mr. Sato, whatever you're thinking, don't. He'll know I talked to you. He threatened your daughter. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. He mentioned her, where she goes to school, what time she gets picked up. She looked away. I understood. Kenzo's hands tightened on the table edge. In his world, threatening children crossed lines even criminals respected. It marked Thorne as something worse than dangerous, sloppy, desperate. Stupid. I'm going to handle this, Kenzo said, quietly, without your name attached. You can't. I can and I will. He pulled out a black card and gave it to her. If anything happens before I do anything at all, you call this number. Not the police, not HR, me. Understand? Elena stared at the card like it might bite her. It had a phone number, nothing else. Why, she asked, why would you do this? Kenzo considered lying. Could say it was about liability, about maintaining professional standards, about protecting his investment. But he'd been lying to himself for 3 months, and he was tired. Because you stopped humming, he said quietly, 3 weeks ago. Elena's breath caught. Go home, Kenzo said. Take the rest of the night. I'll handle your manager. She stood on shaky legs, started toward the kitchen, then stopped. Mr. Sato, thank you. He nodded once, watched her leave through the service entrance, avoiding Thorne's territory. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security. Yamamoto, I need everything on Silas Thorne. Personnel files, surveillance footage, financial records, everything. What are we looking for? Theft, Kenzo said coldly. And when you find it, and you will find it, I want everything documented, quietly. He hung up and poured himself fresh whiskey. Somewhere in the building, Silas Thorne was still terrorizing the staff. Not for long. Kenzo Sato hadn't closed the Onyx Lounge in 15 years. But for the past 6 nights, he'd been the last person to leave, nursing whiskey in his private room while Elena finished her closing duties, a silent shadow between her and Silas Thorne's office. Thorne had noticed, everyone had noticed. Boss, Yamamoto had said on night 3, you're making the staff nervous. They think you're conducting surveillance. I am, Kenzo replied, watching Elena wipe down tables with methodical precision. On who? Everyone. It wasn't entirely a lie. Yamamoto had delivered Thorne's files 48 hours after their conversation, a catalog of small corruptions, skimmed tips, falsified inventory reports, nothing massive enough to trigger audits but enough to build a termination case. But building cases took time, documentation, witnesses who wouldn't vanish the moment Thorne suspected trouble. So Kenzo stayed, visible, unmovable. A message written in expensive whiskey and deliberate presence. Touch her again, and I'll notice. On the seventh night, Elena approached his table at 11:47 p.m., after the last guest had departed. Mr. Sato, her voice was careful, professional. The kitchen is preparing to close. May I get you anything else? Sit, he said. She hesitated. They'd barely spoken since that first conversation, just the usual exchanges of service and acknowledgement. But something had shifted. She no longer flinched when he moved, no longer angled her face away from light. The bruises were fatting. I really should finish. The kitchen can wait. Kenzo gestured to the seat across from him. Humor me. Elena sat, perched on the edge like a bird ready for flight. Have you eaten? He asked. I'll grab something at home. That's not what I asked. Her silence was answer enough. Kenzo signaled to Yamamoto, and within minutes, a server appeared with 2 plates, miso-glazed salmon, perfectly seared, with seasonal vegetables that cost more than most people spent on weekly groceries. I can't, Elena started. You can, and you will. Kenzo pushed 1 plate toward her. Staff meals are included in your contract. Consider this a late dinner. This isn't a staff meal. It is tonight. Elena stared at the plate like it might disappear. Then slowly, she picked up her fork. They ate in comfortable silence. Kenzo watched her relax incrementally, shoulders dropping, breathing deepening, the constant vigilance dimming to something almost peaceful. He hasn't bothered me, she said finally. Since that night, he's been different. Different how? Polite, distant, she met his eyes, afraid. Good. Mr. Sato, I appreciate what you're doing, but you can't stay here every night. People will talk. Let them. You don't understand. If Thorne thinks I asked for protection, if he thinks I'm the reason you're watching him, then he'll do nothing, Kenzo interrupted, because he knows I'm watching him. Elena set down her fork. What happens when you stop watching? It was the question Kenzo had been avoiding. His presence was temporary protection, a band-aid over a bullet wound. Real safety required permanent solutions. I'm building a case, he said. When I have enough evidence, he'll be gone. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. And until then? Until then, I stay late. Kenzo leaned back, studying her. Unless you'd prefer I didn't. Elena was quiet for a long moment. No, she said finally. It helps knowing you're here. Something warm unfurled in Kenzo's chest. Dangerous, distracting. Tell me about Kelly, he said, changing the subject before he could examine that feeling too closely. Elena's face transformed. The fear melted away, replaced by something radiant. She's reading at a 5th grade level, wants to be a marine biologist, thinks dolphins are magic. Smart kid. Too smart, she asks questions I can't answer. Elena smiled softly. She's lucky to have you, he said quietly. Elena looked up, surprised. You don't know me, Mr. Sato. I know enough. He finished his whiskey. I know you work 4 jobs to keep her in a good school district. I know you've never missed a shift. I know you're stronger than anyone I've ever met. I'm not strong, just, she trailed off, surviving. Survival is its own kind of strength. They sat in companionable silence until the lights outside dimmed. Elena stood, collected their plates, muscle memory overriding circumstance. Elena, Kenzo said as she turned to leave. She paused. Same time tomorrow. A smile ghosted across her face. Small but real. Same time tomorrow, Mr. Sato. Silas Thorne had built his career on reading power dynamics, on knowing when to bow and when to strike, on understanding that in places like the Onyx Lounge, visibility was currency and invisibility was survival. For 6 years, he'd been invisible to the people who mattered. Then Kenzo Sato started noticing the waitress. It began with late nights, the boss nursing whiskey until closing, Elena Vance disappearing for longer periods of time in the private room. Then came the auditors. Quarterly reviews moved to monthly. Financial records scrutinized. Questions asked about inventory discrepancies that had gone unnoticed for years. Thorne wasn't stupid. He knew what was happening. The girl had talked. Worse, she'd been believed. She had probably given it up for the big man, thrown herself at him like a cheap hooker. Friday night 2:00 a.m., Thorne sat in his office reviewing security footage. The lounge was empty except for cleaning staff. Elena had clocked out 30 minutes ago, escorted to her car by one of Sato's security team. Protected. The word tasted like acid. Thorne pulled up his personal accounts on his laptop. The money he'd skimmed over 6 years sat in offshore accounts, $340,000. Carefully accumulated from tip pools, inflated vendor invoices, ghost employees on the payroll. Enough to disappear. Start over somewhere Kenzo Sato's reach didn't extend. But running meant admitting defeat, meant letting a waitress destroy everything he'd built. No. If he was going down, he wasn't going alone. Thorne opened his safe and removed a bank envelope. $15,000 in cash, withdrawn yesterday from one of Sato's business accounts. Money earmarked for a supplier payment. Money that would be missed during the next audit. Money with a perfect scapegoat. He checked the hallway. Empty. Security cameras in the staff area had malfunctioned an hour ago, a problem that would mysteriously resolve itself tomorrow morning after the damage was done. Elena's locker was in the back row, combination lock unchanged since her first day. Thorne had memorized all the staff combinations, standard procedure for emergencies, he'd explained when implementing the policy. Really, it was insurance. The lock clicked open. Inside, a spare uniform emergency tampon box, a photo of her daughter taped to the metal. Kelly, gap-toothed and smiling, wearing a school uniform that probably cost Elena a week's tips. Thorne felt nothing looking at that photo, just a problem requiring a solution. He placed the envelope behind the uniform, positioning it carefully. Visible enough to be found during a routine inspection, hidden enough to look like she'd tried to conceal it. Then he pulled out his phone and composed an email to Sato's head of security. Yamamoto-san, during tonight's closing procedures, I noticed irregularities in the cash room. Recommend immediate audit and locker inspection of all staff with access. Several employees have been acting suspiciously, including Vance. Records show she was scheduled during the times money went missing. Respectfully suggest thorough investigation before weekend shift. Thorne. He hit send. The email would arrive at 6:00 a.m. time to his scheduled send. By 9:00 a.m., Yamamoto would initiate the inspection. By noon, they'd find the money. And Elena Vance would learn what happened to people who spoke up in his lounge. Thorne locked her locker, reset the combination, and erased the security gap from his office computer. By tomorrow, there would be no evidence he'd been near the staff area. Just a troubled employee, stolen money, and Kenzo Sato's disappointment when his protected little bird turned out to be a thief. He poured himself bourbon, the expensive kind he kept for celebrations, and raised his glass to the empty office. To survival, he murmured. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I know what you did. Thorne's blood went cold. Another text. Conference room, 5 minutes, come alone. The number was Sato's, was Yamamoto's, wasn't anyone in his contact list. But Thorne knew power when he felt it, and this was power giving him a choice. Walk into that conference room, or run and confirm his guilt. He finished his bourbon in one swallow. Then he walked. The conference room was dark except for one lamp. Kenzo Sato sat at the head of the table, hands folded, expression unreadable. Behind him stood Yamamoto and two men Thorne didn't recognize. Security, probably. The kind that made people disappear. Sit, Kenzo said quietly. Thorne sat. You made a mistake tonight, Kenzo continued. Would you like to know what it was? Thorne said nothing. You assumed I wasn't watching. Kenzo slid a tablet across the table. On screen, footage of Thorne entering the staff area, opening Elena's locker, planting the envelope. Different cameras, hidden ones. Those don't exist, Thorne whispered. They do now. Kenzo's smile was cold. I installed them 3 days ago, just in case you decided to do something stupid. He leaned forward. You have two choices, Thorne. Walk out that door and never come back, or we have a longer conversation about theft, extortion, and assault. Thorne's hands were shaking. You can't prove. I can prove everything. Kenzo's voice never rose above conversational. Elena will never know you tried to frame her. Your termination will be clean, resignation for personal reasons. But if I ever see you near her, near this building, near any establishment I own. He didn't finish, didn't need to. Do we understand each other? Thorne nodded. Good, you have 1 hour to clear your office. Security will escort you out. Thorne stood on trembling legs and walked toward the door. Thorne, Kenzo called. He turned. She was never the problem, you were. The door closed, and Silas Thorne disappeared into the night. Elena found out about Silas Thorne's disappearance the way she found out about everything at the Onyx, through whispers in the break room. Gone, another server said, eyes wide. Just gone. Security escorted him out at 3 in the morning. HR says he resigned, but nobody resigns from Kenzo Sato. Elena's hands stilled on her locker. What do you mean? Girl, where have you been? Sato doesn't let people quit. You leave when he's done with you, and when he's done, she drew a finger across her throat. You leave. The words echoed through Elena's shift. By midnight, when Kenzo appeared in his usual booth, she'd convinced herself to stay quiet, to be grateful, to not ask questions that might have answers she couldn't unhear. But 3 weeks of late-night meals had changed things between them. 3 weeks of his hand steadying hers when she poured wine. 3 weeks of fingers brushing when he passed her documents he thought she'd find interesting. Articles about marine biology for Kelly, scholarship applications. Things that proved he listened to every word she said. 3 weeks of wanting things she had no business wanting. When the lounge emptied and he gestured for her to sit, the question escaped anyway. What did you do to him? Kenzo looked up from his whiskey, and something in his expression softened. He'd started looking at her like that, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Who? Silas Thorne, everyone saying you. She stopped, started again. What happened? He resigned. Nobody believes that. Does it matter what they believe? Kenzo reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. The touch was familiar now, grounding. He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore. Elena should pull away, should maintain the distance she'd promised herself she'd keep. Instead, her thumb traced circles on his palm, a habit she'd developed without realizing. That's not an answer. Kenzo stood, gently tugging her up with him. He walked to the window overlooking the city, keeping her hand in his. They stood like this before, him pointing out buildings he owned, her pretending she cared about real estate when all she noticed was the warmth of his body beside hers. What do you want me to say, Elena? That I'm a good man who solved your problem legally? He turned to face her, his free hand rising to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed the space where the bruise used to be, a gesture he repeated often, as if reassuring himself it was gone. That would be a lie. I'm not a good man. I've never pretended to be. Elena's breath hitched at his touch. What are you then? Practical. He stepped closer and she let him. Let him into the space she should be defending. I own 43 businesses in this city. Restaurants, clubs, real estate, shipping companies. Half are legitimate. The other half exist in spaces the law doesn't quite reach. You're telling me you're a criminal. I'm telling you I'm complicated. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, fingers threading through her hair the way they had last Thursday when she'd been crying about Kelly's school tuition. I've hurt people, Elena. People who deserved it and people who probably didn't. I've made decisions that would horrify you. Elena's hands found his chest, meant to push him away, but they just rested there, feeling his heartbeat. Steady, strong, dangerous. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked. His forehead touched hers and Elena's eyes closed. And because I need you to understand something. The violence I'm capable of, the things I've done, they're a shield. Protection for the things I value. I've never turned that violence on someone who didn't earn it. And Silas earned it. His voice was rough against her ear. He hurt you, threatened Kelly. In my world, those things have consequences. Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. His hand stayed tangled in her hair, and hers remained pressed against his chest. What kind of consequences? He's alive, broke, blacklisted from every establishment in the city. Kenzo's thumb traced her jawline. If he's smart, he'll leave the state. If he's not, other consequences will follow. The casual way he said it should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. You're not afraid of me, Kenzo observed, his lips dangerously close to hers. You should be. I am afraid. Elena's voice shook, but not from fear, from wanting. I'm terrified, not because I think you'll hurt me, but because I'm starting to trust you, and trusting dangerous men is how people like me disappear. I'm not him. No, you're worse. She tried to step back, but his arms circled her waist, holding her gently, loose enough to escape if she wanted. She didn't want to. Silas was a bully, small, petty. You're the kind of dangerous that reshapes things. And I can't, Kelly can't. I would never hurt Kelly. His hand spread across her back, and Elena realized she was trembling. You don't have to. Just being near you puts her at risk. But even as she said it, her fingers curled into his shirt. Your enemies, your business partners. What happens when they decide the best way to hurt you is through the people you protect? Kenzo's grip tightened fractionally. You think I haven't considered that? You think I don't know that every person I care about becomes a target? Then why protect me? Why not just fire Thorne and forget I exist? Because I tried that. His voice broke slightly. For 3 months I tried to ignore you, to not notice when you stopped humming or when bruises appeared or when fear replaced the grace you used to move with. He pulled her closer, until no space remained between them. I failed, Elena, completely, and I'm not apologizing for it. Elena's hand slid up his chest to his shoulders. Wrong. This was wrong, but it felt more right than anything in her life. What are you saying? I'm saying my world is dangerous. Being near me comes with risks. His hand cupped her face again, tilting it toward his. But I can protect you. I can build walls so high that my enemies would be fools to try. And if they try anyway, then they learn why people fear Kenzo Sato. Elena's breath caught as his thumb brushed her lower lip. I need time to think, to figure out if I can live in a world where protection comes with a body count. Take all the time you need. But his hands didn't release her. Whether you trust me or not, you're under my protection now. That doesn't change. Why? Because you stopped humming. His lips ghosted across her forehead, and I'd like to hear it again. Elena should leave, should step out of his arms and run. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, brief, a question she didn't know how to ask. When she pulled back, Kenzo's eyes were dark with want. "Elena, I need to go," she whispered, finally finding the strength to step away. "Before I make a mistake I can't take back." "Would it be a mistake?" She didn't answer, just grabbed her coat and walked toward the exit. But at the door she paused, turned back. Kenzo stood by the window, watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm. And Elena found herself humming, softly, carefully, as she disappeared into the night. Testing what hope sounded like. What wanting felt like. What falling for a dangerous man might cost her. Elena's apartment was nothing like Kenzo expected. He'd imagined something desperate, peeling paint, broken fixtures, the kind of poverty that made people vulnerable to men like Silas Thorne. Instead, he found a small two-bedroom in a working-class neighborhood, modest but carefully maintained. Flowers in window boxes, a welcome mat that actually looked welcoming. Through the door he heard laughter. His hand hesitated on the doorbell. This was a mistake. He didn't belong in this world, the world of homework and bedtime stories and normal people who didn't solve problems with money and threats. But Elena had invited him, had said quietly after their kiss 3 nights ago, "If you want to understand what you're protecting, you should meet her." So Kenzo pressed the doorbell. Elena answered in jeans and a sweater, her hair down, no makeup. She looked younger, softer, more beautiful than she ever had at the Onyx. "You came," she said, and he heard the surprise in her voice. "You doubted." "A little," she stepped aside. "Come in. Fair warning, Kelly's been asking questions since I told her you were visiting." The apartment smelled like vanilla and something baking. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. A small table held homework papers and library books about ocean life. And there, curled on a worn couch reading a book too advanced for her age, was Kelly. She looked up when Kenzo entered and he saw Elena in her face. Same eyes, same quiet assessment. But where Elena had learned to hide, Kelly hadn't yet discovered the need. "You're Mr. Sato," she announced, setting her book aside. "Mom says you own a restaurant." "Several, actually." Kenzo found himself smiling, something that happened rarely in his other life. "Your mother works at one of them. She says you're nice to her. The last manager was." Kelly's directness was disarming. "Are you Mom's boyfriend?" "Kelly," Elena's voice carried warning and embarrassment. "It's a valid question," Kenzo said. He moved to the couch, sat at a respectful distance. "Your mother and I are close friends. Friends who have dinner every night." "Kelly reads above her grade level," Elena explained weakly. "In everything." Kenzo studied the little girl who held Elena's entire world in her gap-toothed smile. "What are you reading?" Kelly brightened. "Marine biology. Did you know dolphins have names? They call each other with specific whistles. It's like having a word that means you." For the next hour, Kenzo listened to Kelly explain ocean ecosystems with the passion of someone who'd found their calling at 7 years old. Elena brought cookies, homemade, slightly burnt, and tea, and Kenzo felt something shift in his chest. This was what he'd been protecting. Not just Elena, but this small universe where a little girl could dream about dolphins and believe the world was safe enough to hold those dreams. "Mr. Sato," Kelly's voice pulled him back. "Do you have kids?" "No." "Do you want them?" Elena made a strangled sound. "Kelly, that's—" "I never thought about it," Kenzo said honestly. "My work doesn't leave much room for family." "What kind of work?" "Dangerous work, violent work, the kind that made children orphans and mothers desperate." "Business," he said instead. "I help people solve problems." "Mom says you solved her problem with the mean manager." Elena's eyes widened. I didn't say it like that." "It's okay." Kenzo met Kelly's gaze. "I did solve it. Your mother is very important to me. Making sure she's safe is important too. Kelly nodded seriously. Then, with the blunt honesty only children possessed, are you going to marry her? The question hung in the air. Elena looked mortified. Kenzo should have deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. Instead, he looked at Elena, at her embarrassment and hope and fear all tangled together, and said, I'd like to, someday, if she'll have me. Elena's teacup rattled against the saucer. Kelly grinned. Cool, can we get a dog too? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of marine biology facts and Kelly's bedtime routine. Kenzo watched Elena read bedtime stories, tuck blankets, kiss foreheads, watched her be a mother in ways his own mother had been before the syndicate consumed everything. When Kelly finally slept, Elena walked him to the door. You didn't have to say that, she whispered. About marriage, she'll remember, she'll ask about it. I meant it. Kenzo's hand found her waist and wrapped around it. Every word. You barely know me. I know enough. He lifted her hand to his lips. I know you're everything good I've never been, and I know I want to be the kind of man who deserves to stand in this apartment and be welcomed. Elena's eyes glistened. You're already that man, Kenzo, you just don't see it. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and full of promises he intended to keep. When he left, walking past the flowers and the welcome mat into the night, Kenzo made a decision. It was time to leave the shadows. For her, for Kelly, for the possibility of a life that didn't end in violence. Time to build something worth protecting. 6 months later, the Onyx reopened as Yuki, named after Kenzo's mother, who had loved white lilies and asymmetrical arrangements. No more private booths where deals happened in shadows. No more whispered negotiations over blood money. Just a legitimate 5-star restaurant with a waiting list 3 months long and a director who had transformed from ghost to queen. Elena stood at the entrance in a dress that cost more than her old annual salary, greeting guests with the same grace she'd once used to disappear. But now people saw her, remembered her, requested her by name. Kenzo watched from the bar, nursing whiskey and marveling at the transformation, not just of the space, but of himself. He'd sold his shadowy holdings, restructured his empire into legitimate businesses, cut ties with the syndicate that had defined him since childhood. Some called it weakness, others called it evolution. He called it Elena. Stop starring, she said, appearing beside him with a smile that still made his heart forget its rhythm. You're making the guests nervous. Let them be nervous. His hand found the small of her back, a touch that had become instinct. I'm allowed to admire my girlfriend. Fiancé, she corrected, the diamond on her finger catching light. Not yet, I haven't asked properly. You asked in front of Kelly, that counts. That was practice. Kenzo pulled her closer. The real proposal involves significantly more planning. Elena laughed, the sound he'd been chasing since the night she stopped humming. You've gone soft, Kenzo Sato. Blame your daughter. She demands a dog and a proper proposal. She has you wrapped around her finger. She learned from her mother. They stood together watching the restaurant thrive, built on honesty instead of fear. Kelly was with her grandmother tonight, probably researching dolphin habitats and planning their summer trip to the aquarium. The family membership Kenzo had bought as a just because gift. Do you miss it? Elena asked quietly. The power, the danger. Kenzo thought about the man he'd been, the iron boss who solved problems with violence and money. Then he looked at Elena, at the life they were building, at the possibility of mornings that didn't involve blood on his conscience. No, he said simply, I found something better. What's that? He kissed her temple, a reason to come home. Elena hummed softly, an old Motown song about love and second chances. And Kenzo Sato, former syndicate boss, smiled. Because he'd finally stepped out of the shadows. And the light was beautiful.